Hey everyone, I'm Danielle D'Souza Gill. I will be hosting Dinesh's podcast while he's away this week, and I'm super excited to be here. If you're a regular Dinesh D'Souza listener, then you have probably heard me on the last couple days guest hosting, and I've done it in the past. It's been a little while because I'm usually busy taking care of my daughter, and I support my husband's congressional campaign for U.S. Congress here in North Texas, Brandon Gill, and we are super excited about this year. I mean, it's going to be a crazy year, but we all need to do what we can to fight for President Trump. All right, well, we have a lot to get to today. We are going to be talking about lawfare. We're going to be talking about Trump verdict. We're going to be talking about AI, technology. We're going to be speaking with Mark Davis. He is the host of 660 AM The Answer in Dallas-Fort Worth about Supreme Court, running with issues like abortion in 2024. We're going to be talking about all kinds of topics with Mark today, so stay tuned. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
In the mid-19th century, there was a military specialty known as the sapper. This role wasn't typical of your average battlefield combatant, such as the soldier, the cavalry, or artillery. The sapper was a demolitions expert whose job was to bring down fortifications that were otherwise too resilient to stand against your standard cannonball attack. Sappers either crawled to or dug beneath heavy walls to cause them to collapse and form a breach. Once the breach is formed, the fortress's defenses are compromised, and the battle transitions from siege to combat. The point of the sapper is to render the enemy's defenses useless. This job doesn't confer any of the battlefield glory that normal soldiers enjoy. The sapper worked in secret, sometimes literally beneath ground. But it was dangerous work all the same because he ran the risk of being caught in his own collapse. In the age of aerial bombardment, sapping as it was once practiced is no longer as common. But you can still find examples if you know where to look. Take Special Counsel Jack Smith or Georgia prosecutor Fani Willis, for example. Smith and Willis are the prosecutors tasked with taking down the biggest threat to the establishment, Donald J. Trump. If you look at their cases, a disturbing pattern arises. Nearly all of Trump's co-defendants are attorneys. These include many familiar names, people like Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Peter Navarro, Sidney Powell, Jeffrey Clark, Kenneth Chesebro, Jenna Ellis, Ray Smith, and Robert Cheeley. Just about anyone with a JD who's come within 5 feet of Trump. Many of these attorneys have already been subjected to some form of attack on their personal records, including threats of disbarment. Smith and Willis seek to attack an essential function of law. As Hans A. von Spakovsky writes in his analysis of Willis's indictment for the Heritage Foundation in August, quote, by naming as alleged co-conspirators the lawyers who were representing Trump and providing him with advice and legal counsel in actions that were in the state before legislators and in private conversations, Willis is also attacking the fundamental way that our justice system works, in which lawyers are tasked with vigorously pursuing the interests of their clients. Smith and Willis are willing to attack the very practice of law, simply because they see it as a way to criminalize giving advice to Donald Trump. The tactical goal is clear. The prosecutors are acting as deep state sappers. By going after Trump's attorneys, they gnaw at his defenses. Smith and Willis are trying to make serving Trump in any capacity a professional liability. And in so doing, they drive away future counsels as well. Once again, we see the DOJ engage in process as punishment with the intention of nullifying Trump by leaving him legally defenseless. On September 11th, our country remembered the terrible day that was 9/11. The tragedy of that time still fills us with sorrow, and the ceremonies remain appropriately solemn. However, it's important to point out that in the years following 9/11, we've conducted numerous trials for people suspected of aiding or planning those attacks. Those suspected terrorists involved in 9/11 were all allowed counsel for their trials. But even those attorneys who represented men suspected of causing the deaths of thousands of innocent Americans, even those attorneys were not attacked in the same manner that Trump's attorneys are being attacked today. The disparity is ironic. As we've discussed, the method of politically targeted lawfare, legal warfare, known as lawfare, was one of the tools conceived of by the military to go after terrorists and their supporters in their own countries. Like many of our counterterrorism weapons developed post 9/11, lawfare is now being used by the government on its own people. By targeting opposition attorneys for the supposed crime of practicing law, these deep state sappers go one step beyond even traditional lawfare. Attorneys are supposed to be able to represent any side in any matter. As Spakovsky notes in his piece, the prosecution is criminalizing representation. He writes, quote, "In other words, attorneys could be charged with a crime for doing what the professional code of conduct tells the lawyer he is supposed to do, namely, represent the interest of his client to the best of his abilities." As the deep state uses the law to wreak havoc and destruction, they, like the sapper of old, risk getting caught in their own collapse. Yet another sign of the deep state's desperation.
You might have heard Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, and so they want to pass the savings directly on to you by having a $25 extravaganza. Now, when Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company, just the pillow, but with the help of his dedicated employees, Mike now has hundreds of products, some of which you may not even know about. So to get the word out, I want to invite my viewers and listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. 6-pack towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, $25. And for the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. By the way, orders over $75 get free shipping as well. The amazing offer won't last long, so act now. Call 800-876-0227. The number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh.
A recent episode of Joshua Phillips' Crossroads on Epic Times featured a story about a plan by the IRS to utilize artificial intelligence in order to go after tax evaders. Now, AI is a powerful tool that has proven extremely effective at completing complex tasks. In a previous episode of the show, I discussed how its application threatens even the creative fields of writing, acting, and movie production. I talked about how the greatest threat AI poses to mankind comes not from its impressive power to mimic the human mind, but rather from its slavish obedience to the forces that control it. To your average IRS bureaucrat, the idea of a hyper-intelligent tool with no moral compass probably sounds like a dream come true, especially for people who want to use it as a method of control. What better way to increase yields from the serf-like tax cows toiling for wages from coast to coast? The fact that this decision to use AI comes after the IRS has received a funding increase for weapons and agents makes for a frightening picture of what the IRS has planned for America. After all, across the country, people are pushing back against the government's use of technology to encroach on our civil liberties. For example, in many places, stoplight cameras are no longer allowed to issue tickets because people are repulsed by the idea of being policed by machines, and they have voted accordingly. The uneasiness of citizens, however, is not a concern for organizations like the IRS. Government bureaucrats seem to believe that no tool is off limits and no weapon is forbidden when it comes to enforcing compliance. A prime example of this is the Missouri v. Biden case, which recently had major injunctions upheld by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Recall that this case revealed the whole of government approach to combating the completely fabricated bogeyman of misinformation. The misinformation in question turned out to be anything that threatened Joe Biden's reputation or Big Pharma's bottom line. Behind the scenes, government agencies like the Department of Health and Human Services, and even the FBI itself, were pulling strings to ensure that social media companies would censor the speech of even renowned doctors, such as Stanford's Dr. J. Bhattacharya. Despite being a medical expert, Dr. Bhattacharya was not only censored, but also shadow banned on Twitter for highlighting the dangers and senselessness of mass testing and lockdowns. The Fifth Circuit's opinion underscores the thuggish tactics the government used to coerce social media companies into complying with their requests. These included inflammatory statements accusing such companies of poisoning the public and literally killing people. Companies were warned to toe the line or face regulatory violations or other harsher repercussions. From tax evasion to so-called misinformation, the government has no shortage of excuses or crises by means of which they may argue for a more heavy-handed approach to controlling us. It has always been about power, and it looks like it always will be. At least, that is how things will remain as long as we allow them to persist. And here we come to the fundamental problem for the bureaucrats, namely our rights and how our government operates. Because when it comes to our rights, the government assumes the authority to do away with them, as long as they have a plausible reason and they have the power. Increasingly, though, voters are becoming wary of such reasons. That's why the governor of New Mexico received such pushback from her fellow citizens when she thought that simply by conjuring up the specter of a public health crisis, she could summarily suspend the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Why would she think she could get away with doing such a thing? Because other governors have also assumed such power while trampling on civil liberties in other ways. And if a higher court eventually strikes such measures down, no problem. These same politicians just go back to the drawing board to await the next emergency to use as a pretense for doing what they wanted to do all along, which was trample on our liberties. But hold on here. Our rights as enshrined in the U.S. Constitution are the greatest birthright we have as American citizens. These rights are supposed to guarantee our freedom and our autonomy. They form the basis of our society. But if that is the case, then why do politicians and bureaucrats keep assaulting those same rights without fear of repercussion? Shouldn't there be penalties for those who are caught red-handed violating our rights, like the governor of New Mexico has just tried to do? Or is the Constitution no longer worth the paper upon which it is written? So what do we do? Besides voting for candidates who refuse to countenance such power grabs, perhaps government officials who are caught infringing on the rights of their fellow citizens should be permanently banned from government, from working there. It's supposed to be government service. Something tells me this particular penalty would seem like a fate worse than death for these careerist bureaucrats because they've staked their spot in D.C. Mandatory fines or prison sentences for any bureaucrat caught in regulatory or enforcement actions that abrogate our rights would definitely be a good place to start. But whatever we decide, it is long past time to remind these public servants that they're just that. They are public servants, not our masters. We have a Bill of Rights. It is high time for a Bill for Rights, because they're there to protect our rights.
We recently had some monumental news, not good news, but no one's talking about it. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on the national debt surpassed every individual budget item except Social Security. That's right. The U.S. now spends more on interest than on national defense or even Medicare. And it's only getting worse as big government continues to spend like drunken sailors. This is why savvy investors, central banks, concerned savers are turning to gold, something that is not tied to the inflated U.S. dollar. You can too with the help of Birch Gold. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your free information kit on gold. No obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned my trust with their education-first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and their countless five-star reviews, which is why I buy my gold from Birch Gold. Protect your savings. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. Have you heard about the groundbreaking film hitting theaters nationwide this summer? Get ready for The Relentless Patriot. It's a captivating documentary by Global Ascension Studios, Hollywood's first ever conservative movie studio, headed by Joshua Macchiello. This isn't your average documentary. It's a powerful tribute to American patriotism and activism, following Scott Lobido's remarkable journey from stirring flag renditions to outspoken advocacy for our service members. Scott's story is one of unwavering dedication and unfiltered passion. Join the movement on June 13th for the special release of The Relentless Patriot. Experience Scott's journey, feel the pulse of American patriotism. Don't miss this unforgettable cinematic experience. Mark your calendars. Be part of history with The Relentless Patriot. Brought to you by Global Ascension Studios.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Mark Davis. He is the host of 660 AM The Answer here in Dallas-Fort Worth. Brandon and I are local Mark Davis fans. So, Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
It is a joy to be with you. Great to be hanging out with the family.
Oh my gosh. Well, guys, you're in for a real treat because Mark Davis, he has such an amazing voice. So I feel like when it goes back to me in the conversation, it's going to be like nails on a chalkboard. But I just love listening to Mark Davis. So thank you for joining us. But yeah, Mark, there's so much news to discuss. I feel like the Trump verdict is, of course, still something on the minds of everyone because of this heightened lawfare, because of this attacking of someone who isn't just a former president, but someone who is our leading Republican candidate. What was your initial reaction when you heard the news to the guilty verdict?
Danielle, even when you know it's coming, even when, because we all had the trial go for, almost a couple of months. And even when you know that it's, even when you know that the net political benefit may help him win 40 states. As we look at sentencing July 11th, it's like they put him to jail. He gets 400 electoral votes. So even when you know that this blowback is coming, even when you know that the appeal is really likely to succeed because there's so much reversible error here. Even with those things stacked on top of each other, it was still a shock. It was still a gut punch. And it wasn't a shock because we were surprised it happened, but it's as if we had to wait to see just how sickening it was, to see the lawfare that you mentioned, to see the weaponization of one of our institutions, the judiciary, against a leading political figure. This is Banana Republic stuff. This is political vendetta dragged into the courtroom. This was an unbiased and unfit judge. So you talk about those things. Lord knows I did. I know we all did in our various circles of friends. But to see it actually happen was still a spectacle that just had the power to nauseate. But then as soon as that, we all woke up the following morning. The show I had in this room the following morning was a remarkable thing to behold. And I bet all of us watching here might have had this happen in our circle of friends, family, and acquaintances. The passion, the determination, the, blank, no, we're not going to let this happen. That's the kind of energy that led to him making hundreds of millions of dollars in the immediate aftermath. So can we keep this up till November 5th? I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. I mean, that is the silver lining. He raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some way, I feel like the primaries. I know it almost feels like so long ago now, but the primaries they got intense, and in a way, I feel like hopefully this unifies every Republican to stand behind President Trump and say, we are facing something so evil from the Democrats at this point that even regardless of any kind of infighting we had the last year or two, we have to all realize just how high the stakes are for whether you're, you are a Nikki Haley supporter or Ron DeSantis or President Trump or whoever it is. It's like we can't stand on the sidelines anymore because it's just the Democrats have taken things to another level where it almost feels like it's not politics as normal because this isn't a normal situation.
Nothing is normal here because in looking at the way this trial was brought and looking at the sentencing that now lies before us, it's real easy to say, I know because I've said it, it's easy to say, oh, there's no way he's going to put him in prison. Is there? I mean, I still don't think so. I'll believe that when I see it. But truly, everything is on the table. When all of these norms and all of these usual threads of logic are just dashed against the rocks because the Trump hatred runs so thick and so strongly through the judiciary, through the media culture, through the Democrat Party, through some people who call themselves Republicans, we get to the point where truly anything can happen. You made a really great point at the beginning of your question that this has opened a lot of eyes. There are some people who are looking to sit on the fence, and I don't know what anybody looks like who goes, Trump, Biden, what's the difference? The differences, of course, are vast, but I guess there's some people who just don't care that much. But now they do care if the wheels of justice can be brought to grind over the neck of one of our most powerful and influential citizens. Trump is fond of saying, if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And a lot of people started to get that. The second kind of clarity, when you talk in the Nikki Haley crowd, or even further, the actual never Trump crowd, which I've never been able to fully psychoanalyze, but even some of them are realizing that there's a gentleman named Guy Benson, who I like a lot. Guy is a pretty reliable conservative on most things, never liked Trump. He wrote a piece that got a lot of attention. He said, I'm starting to realize that with all of my objections to Trump and all of my misgivings about his excesses or whatever, that what I just saw our system do to him on this empty, threadbare, ridiculous premise, that may pose a greater danger than any of Donald Trump's excesses. So I gave Guy online and on the air credit for achieving some clarity, better late than never. And I hope a lot of people are understanding they just need to get over themselves. If you don't like the mean tweets or something in his past or something he said once or the way he phrased something, none of that matters when you have a country to save.
Absolutely. And I feel like these last, 8 years and maybe the next 4 years, it's kind of the Republican Party has been going through a lot of growing pains. We went from being a Bush party to now being Trump party. And the Democrats, they have not resolved their issues. They have a lot of infighting. They have the radical pro-Hamas, kind of that side of the wing. And then they have some of the more establishment Democrats. And so after this, I don't really know where the Democrats are going to be. But I think the good news is the Republicans, we're at least going to have a clear ideology that's, conservative and America first. But the Democrats, I don't know if they really have that because right now they're really struggling. And I don't know if a lot of Democrats are even all going to support Biden, who even maybe supported him before or who voted for Obama, because they feel like he's not left wing enough, and so he's having to straddle this line with the ceasefire and not really knowing how to handle it. And now he's trying to deal with that with the border. He's recently said he's trying to act like he's going to do something about our border crisis when in fact Mayorkas and his people have ushered in this crisis and really welcomed it. So I think he's trying to play to that because most Americans know that this border crisis is a massive problem. And so he's kind of like, hey, I'm not as radical as you think, but I'll open borders, people, vote for me. So how do you think that's going to play out with Biden's kind of messaging there?
He paints himself into a corner, and there are two ways in which he's done it. You just mentioned the border. I've often said to everybody, just be what you are. Be what you are and let the chips fall where they may. This is an open borders president. Go do that and see how it works out for you. There are millions of Americans who love open borders. They love them because we're going to get all those people in. We're going to get them normalized, naturalized, legalized, so that they can then be energized for decades of Democrat voting. That is the Biden border policy. So just go with that. Don't try to gaslight us or BS us into thinking that you're serious about shutting down the border if we achieve some magical number of 2,500. Is that what the executive order said? Is somebody standing there at a clicker like they're at Target for millionth customer day? $24.99. You're the lucky winner. And then you get on the bat phone to the president and say, shut her down, sir. We're at 2,500. It's lunchtime. We're at 25. Does anyone think this is going to happen? So he does this. It's an election ploy. It's political theater. And the first thing that happens is he gets eaten alive by the portion of his base that loves open borders. Like, wait a minute, who abducted Biden and brought us this guy? You're morphing into Trump. The other thing on which you can see this is Israel. 10/7 happens. It's a horrible outrage. The world reacts with righteous indignation. And for about 10 minutes, the Biden administration says, we are steadfast supporters of Israel. But then they retreat to their normal corner. The pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party says, oh, no, we can't have this. And that's when the Squad and the Rashida Tlaibs and the AOCs make clear that there will be a consequence for supporting Israel. And that's how you get Secretary of State Antony Blinken rolling out to Israel every 2 weeks to try to talk Israel out of winning the war. They're playing both sides against the middle. They're getting absolutely destroyed by both sides in so doing. So just, Joe, if you're taking advice from me, which I know you're not, just be who you are. Be what you are and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Joe being who he is, being himself and letting the chips fall where they may is kind of frightening because
I know. Which is exactly my point. If it scares enough people, we got a landslide on November 5th.
Yeah, we have a landslide in November. Yes. And I also wonder, too, what the Democrats what is their 3D chess in all of this? Because I don't know if they would be doing this, the targeting of Trump, the border, I mean, having it open for so long and putting us into this crisis. It's like they must have a plan or strategy for the fall for 2024 in the sense that they think, you know what, let's just push the envelope as far as we can. Let's wreak enough havoc on enough conservatives as we can, Trump, pro-lifers. Let's just go after them. And then when it gets close to November, we'll kind of worry about it then. We'll backtrack, backpedal, blame Trump, pretend he's the real dictator when actually we are. And we'll just spin the tables at the last minute because they control the media and they control the narrative on that side. I know a lot of people say that people's views are kind of baked in. They're baked in when it comes to Trump. Maybe they're baked in when it comes to Biden. What do you think the strategy is in terms of, is it kind of reaching independence? Is it getting people to turn out who are low propensity voters on the right? Is it galvanizing the base? What do you feel like is the strategy here? Because I feel like I'm hearing all sides in terms of, some people say, the Trump conviction, it means that we win in a landslide. But then part of me thinks, whoa, we can't take that for granted because the Democrats aren't dumb and they aren't going to do this if they're thinking, wow, Trump's going to win in a landslide now. Great. They obviously have their own plan. So what do you feel like would be the best strategy as someone who's kind of looking at this?
Everybody is going to be pitching for those voters in the middle, the independent voters, the swing state voters, et cetera, because, MAGA America is going to be there for Trump. So are people who may not be wearing the recognizable red MAGA hat, but who have suddenly come to some clarity that Biden is a disaster. So whatever misgivings they may have about Trump, they're going to vote for him now. In the Democrat Party, the hardened left is going to vote for Biden if you were 114 years old and already dead. So that is baked in, as you said. In this independent group of voters, these are people who are not as ideologically wild as you and I might be, or as James Carville and Democrat activists might be. They just want a country that works. And these are people who vote based on getting out of their houses, getting in their cars, going to work, walking around, talking to people, and taking stock of what they see in this country and do things seem to be working. By every metric, that answer tilts toward Trump's side. Is the economy good? Do the borders work? Are people being punished for crime? Do people in government seem to know how many genders there are? On items from nuts and bolts economics to issues in the culture, are our schools teaching kids what they need to know, or have they morphed into indoctrination camps? People are awakening to this. And I can't sit here, in spring and guarantee that the country is totally eyes wide open. They're going to deliver accountability. We're guaranteed to win. I would hope that that's true. There are miles to go. Stuff in the news may happen. There are all kinds of variables. But on the exact question that you asked, as both parties go looking to independent America to say, you may not be all that conservative, you may not be all that liberal, but just look to us to run the country better. I think that's going to be a big part of the Trump vote. People who may not be that conservative, may not be that pro-life, may not be that pro-Second Amendment or strong borders, but they just remember his presidency, and it seemed like things were working better. One of my favorite memes of the last week, pardon me for making light, is I want every American to remember January 6, 2021, when gas was $1.59 a gallon.
Yes, exactly. It's like, wow, did they run with that January 6th narrative for the last couple years? It is
and they're not done.
Unbelievable.
And they're not done. And that piggybacks onto the other part of your question. Sort of, what will they do? What is their strategy? You're right. You say Democrats are not. You say they're really, really not. This is intentional. There's a wickedness to the intentionality and the strategy that the Democrat Party will bring. And it will be about Trump as the Antichrist. It will be about convicted felon, convicted felon, convicted felon, convicted felon. Another favorite of mine is, we care about you, Trump only cares about himself. If President Trump only cared about himself, he never would have run in the first place. He gave up a life of incredible wealth and privilege and impact and private sector glories in order to put his nose to the grindstone to make this country better. And he did it. He didn't have to come back and ask for more of this punishment, but he is back. And he's doing it because he loves this country, believes in the things that he does, and knows that people's lives can be better irrespective of income, irrespective of race, irrespective of station in life. So they're going to try to get away with that, but we're not going to let them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's sacrificed so much for this country and his whole family. In many ways, it's like they've endured such pain for all of these years. And of course, now with these trials, with more lawsuits coming, it's just going to be unbelievable. But I want to ask you a little bit about common sense, because you were kind of touching on this and saying that, hey, you're a middle of the road person, maybe just by seeing what's happened, seeing gas prices change, seeing inflation, seeing how difficult it is now to get by, they will vote for Republicans. So I agree with you. I feel like that is absolutely a main message. But one thing that concerns me is in 2022, a lot of Republicans, I think, were thinking this. They were thinking, okay, things are so bad in America. There's going to be a waking up. People are going to vote on common sense. They're going to vote on these kitchen table issues. There's going to be a red wave. And then, it didn't exactly happen, unfortunately. And so I wonder with some of these things, is our country getting to the point where we try to win on ideas and they try to win on the ground game, they try to win on the election, and we are winning on ideas? I think without question, we are winning on ideas, unless you're completely indoctrinated from a liberal wing of the country. Maybe you live in New York and you were one of the jurors on the case, but everyone else, I think, does see the truth. So what are some things that we can do as far as the ground game? Because I know you've analyzed a lot of elections. What have you seen over the last few years when you've looked closely at races and how we can kind of combat these things?
You set up exactly the combination that every successful year for a political party needs. You have to win on ideas. Then you've got to get people to the polls. You got to mobilize. You have to have good, strong individual state party structures. That's why I'm just thrilled, just not on principle, but in practicality, to watch President Trump rack up $400 million, because I want to see that funneled into Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, so that they can have really strong local, down to the precinct level, granular efforts to make sure that we get people to the polls to reflect this kind of passion. The other thing that we got to talk about, and I get calls about this all the time, and I know that everybody, that you, your husband, your dad have had so much to say about this, and that's, what are we going to do about the cheating? I get it, nothing depresses me more than taking calls from people who say, Mark, I know we're right on the issues, and I know that there's a certain amount of passion that's going to kick in here, but is the fix already in? Is it even worth it? And my heart just sinks. I tell them two things. One, in our state of Texas and in Georgia and some other states, the state Republican Party has mobilized a lot of things, a lot of poll watchers, a lot of almost surveillance operations. We're on to them. We're not going to wake up as we did in 2020 the following morning and take a look at what happened to the various bar graphs and go, wait a minute, what in the world happened at 3 o'clock in the morning? I believe we're going to be on them and more vigilant, and our eyes are going to be open. The second thing I've said is, going into this election, having been screwed, pardon me, as we were in 2020, there's an old saying that if it ain't close, they can't cheat. Of course, they can cheat, but our goal is, with our turnout in these swing states, if all the Democrat mischief all put together can change your result by 1%, and that's a huge number. In any state, 1% of all the voters is thousands and thousands of people. I'm going to give them that. Let's say that cheating will get you 1%. It's like playing on the road with crooked refs in college basketball. They cheat by 1, we show up with 3% more than we otherwise would, with 2% more than we otherwise would. And that's going to be about, it's going to be about casting this really broad net, not by being less conservative, but by making Trump's conservatism look attractive to a lot of people. The president did something this very day as we're taping that made my heart sing. He had the right kind of skepticism and even derision for all the ballot gathering, early voting, write-in nonsense. And there's so much of this that I want to get rid of. But until we do, we got to use it. If there's early voting, then early vote and bring 50 people to early vote for Trump. If there's some type of mail-in, drop box, something or other, use it. Use it better than they do. Beat them at their own game. Mm-hmm. And so the president, I think, very wisely has started to pivot toward making that part of his messaging, so that some of the people who are down in the dumps, who are still stung by 2020, so that they can have some hope.
Yeah, no, I mean, we got to fight fire with fire, and we're not hopeless at all. In a sense, it's like, no, that means we need to up our game. We need to be doing what they're doing. In some ways, I look at California, because it's kind of like, if the country keeps going down into a hole, California is our future. It's like becoming communist, and the conservatives there have woken up. They do the legal things, but they collect the ballots and all that stuff, and they know what kind of the situation is. And that's why I'm glad Laura Trump is in her role at the RNC, because I feel like she's going to do a great job. But if we look at more conservative states, red states, we can't kind of say, okay, we're just going to do politics as usual, because we have to be awoken there too, to say, hey, we do need the poll watchers. We need to be getting out there and doing all the things we need to do. But I wanted to ask you about kind of the going back to the messaging with abortion. What do you feel like should be the message across the country? Because in my view, I feel like we shouldn't change our values on abortion. I'm 100% pro-life. But I also feel like in a certain situation, maybe if you're in a swing location or things like that, you don't need to make that the main thing you talk about. You know, I feel like it's better to have a Republican win that seat or win that area than a Democrat, because at least we can get their vote some of the time, as opposed to none of the time. And so you have to kind of analyze the situation based on where you are. And so I feel like, I'm not sure if we have a coherent messaging on that issue for certain races, for certain things people are running in. And sometimes people characterize Republicans as if we're, oh my gosh, we want to, kill mothers and all these crazy things, which is completely untrue. I mean, abortion is basically unthinkable in Texas now. And as far as I know, people are doing great in Texas. So it's worked out great. Texas is a model for the nation. But what would be kind of your advice as far as approaching that issue? Because I feel like the Democrats are trying to run solely on the messaging of Trump's a felon and he's, we're these crazy pro-lifers.
Crazy pro-lifers are going to try to jam down our legislative throats a national abortion. The answer to your very, very important question is play to the room. And by that, I mean, no, you don't become less pro-life. I know you won't. I know I won't. I don't want any candidate to either. But I want our candidates to say that in this post-Roe v. Wade era, and thank God Roe v. Wade was overturned, not because I'm pro-life or you're pro-life or anybody's pro-life. I mean, that's why I was. But the reason Roe v. Wade had to be overturned is because it was stone cold unconstitutional. There is no right to abortion in the Constitution. So what we have now is something that I believe America is slowly getting used to. And that is the notion that in our state of Texas, we're going to protect a lot of babies. In California and New York, they're not. That's their call. President Trump himself has said this, that, the country is going to be a tapestry. Different states are going to handle things differently. As a pro-life person, I want to fight for every state to be as pro-life as Texas is. And I'm going to do that. Am I going to walk out into the arena and start talking about a national 15-week ban right now? I am not. Not because I wouldn't like one, but because you got to be very, very careful about that. Right now, with every state doing what every state wants to do, it means that California and New York are still ghoulishly permissive, and I don't like that. But it means that Texas and Alabama and Utah, it can be really, really pro-life. And I love that. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to give it up. And here's the risk of telling Congress, hey, let's have a legislative 15-week standard. We are then just one election cycle away from having Congress undo that. The minute we say federal abortion law, we say take it out of the hands of the states. And as soon as it is in Congress's hands, Congress can flip. Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. Democrats talk all the time about wanting Roe v. Wade, the protections of Roe v. Wade codified into law. Well, not right now. You're not going to come to my Texas and tell us we can't be pro-life. But if we do put this in the hands of the federal government with a federal law we like, we may 2 years later, 4 years later, get a federal law that we hate. So be careful what you win for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, ultimately, I hope there is a constitutional amendment, but of course, we then need a 2/3 majority, which we definitely don't have. So there's no point in pushing for something that we can't make happen. I think back when, I think Lindsey Graham introduced a bill, and it's like we don't have the votes. It's not going to work. So if we have the votes, great. But if we don't, we need to be playing the ground game on the states. We need to be pushing each state individually in a more pro-life direction, and eventually it will change the culture. And then we will have enough where we can make it federally unthinkable as well.
Changing hearts on the way to changing minds, on the way to changing law. As soon as the Dobbs decision came down, everybody was conservatives and pro-lifers. We were dancing in the streets. On this show, I said, look out, because there is going to be blowback. And that's what the Democrats are enjoying right now, the ability to weaponize that blowback against us. I said, let this marinate. This is not the end of the pro-life movement. It's the beginning of a new chapter where pro-lifers should fan out. I don't know if we're going to turn California and New York into pro-life states, but we can make certain states that are in the middle. We can make a number of states in middle America and even a number of coastal states. We can make them more pro-life. And let's do that as part of a long game designed to get to exactly what you referred to, constitutional event.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why in some ways I feel like sealing our border just has to be a top priority, because if they are constantly importing Democrat voters and they're bringing in all these bodies, even putting aside shadiness, let's say they're actual human beings. It's like they're bringing in all these human beings who are going to vote a certain way. But anyways, okay, we're talking to Mark Davis, 660 AM, The Answer. And Mark, last thing I want to ask you is, as far as the Supreme Court, do you think these Trump cases will make it to the court? I know we're awaiting a Supreme Court decision now, different from the New York one. But let's say with this New York one, he's going to appeal. Hopefully that goes well. But do you think ultimately the court wants to get involved in these things? they're obviously seeing this kind of unprecedented situation with presidential candidate. Some people say, hey, the court is worried about its kind of seeming unbiased, and they're worried about their status, and so they're not going to want to weigh in. So I've heard that on the one side. But on the other side, I feel like, well, if they don't weigh in, what is going to happen to this country? I mean, can you just, like, what if I just opened a lawsuit or a state like Texas, Ken Paxton says, we're just going to go after Biden. We know this judge is super conservative. We know all the jurors in this area are super conservative. So you know what? This is what's happening to you, Biden. I mean, we're so not used to operating like that as Republicans, because we follow the rule of law, and we don't weaponize the government, honestly, enough. We just want smaller government, and a lot of our people want to be left alone. So when it comes to court, what do you kind of foresee as far as appeals, making it to the Supreme Court, looking for just as far as the legal process?
I am pleased that there are more constitutionalists on the court than there are non-constitutionalists, and thank you, President Trump, for that. We do have a problem, however, in the form of Chief Justice John, who seems to wake up and figure out what side of the bed he's on for some rulings that in the mold of Anthony Kennedy before him. And interestingly, the thing that seems to motivate Chief Justice Roberts sometimes is not a softness in his constitutionalism necessarily, but a spinal toughness issue of being willing to get involved in cases where the Constitution cries out for clarity, but he just doesn't want to do it because, there are political ramifications. Well, no kidding. In the 2020 challenges, Texas and 18 other states went straight to the Supreme Court and said, look at all of these crazy things that were changed on the fly in the midst of a COVID panic. This cries for the Supreme Court to say, not to hand the election to Trump, but to merely say, wait a minute, this was improper. And maybe that does throw it to the House of Representatives. Maybe it does. And maybe that's exactly what should have happened. But Chief Justice Roberts, in his timid lack of will to rule, even when the Constitution cries out for it, because, we don't want to get the court to get our political hands dirty. Well, then don't. Make sure your constitutional hands are clean and let the political chips fall wherever they may. How does that translate to President Trump's cases now? Even the first layer of appeal, everybody's talking about how the appeals should be successful. And I'm in that camp. They should be successful. But it might take a while, because as soon as you get out of Judge Merchan's, liberal toyland, the first place it's going to go is elsewhere in the state of New York, where the result may not be all that much better. It may, but it may not. The state may care about its reputation. You may get a surprise ruling in Trump's favor, even in the state of New York, but not between now and the election. All of this is going to happen next year. If not, then it probably does go to the Supreme Court, at which point, well, first of all, Trump will either have won or lost by then. So it won't be like there'll be so much more hanging in the balance. And even Chief Justice Roberts can say, well, no matter how we rule, it no longer affects Trump's political fate. It affects his judicial fate. It affects his criminal record. But maybe they will then be able to find. Maybe I know that the other justices, I know that Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor will be ready to rule against him. I'd like to think that Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett will be ready to root for him if Chief Justice Roberts can bring himself to actually address a key constitutional issue. And this lawfare against President Trump that we've seen in these past days and weeks is a pressing constitutional issue. Then I think they'll be willing to do the right thing. And it may be ultimately up to them to do the right thing, because the state of New York may be no help at all.
Right. Wow. Oh, this is going to be a crazy year, Mark.
Tell me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. He is the host of Mark Davis Show, 660 AM The Answer, and can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. What a joy to be here.
Well, that wraps up today's show. If you've enjoyed the show, make sure to follow me on social media. And I am at Danielle D'Souza Gill on all the platforms. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X, True Social, Rumble, and that is at Danielle D'Souza Gill. That's where you can find a lot of my videos, content, thoughts, all those things. All right. Well, I will see you all tomorrow, and MAGA.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.